There we go. And we are live here. And there as well. I'm going to remove this here and switch over. So, hello everyone. Welcome to an episode of Bitcoin Talk. This is a bit of a special episode as I'm streaming currently on two venues at the same time. Both on Twitter and on YouTube. This is also the first live stream I'm doing in 2025. So happy New Year's to you all. Happy Christmas due to having it been passed by. So today I want to talk a little bit about the Bitcoin reserve strategy. So the hot topic since, the election of Donald J. Trump last year. And one of his promises was to install a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now, I want to focus in on this subject just by reason, it is being approached with enough hype, with a certain amount of bullishness, whereas in reality, I'm going to ask you, the viewer, to be a little bit more reserved about that news. By reason, a strategic reserve does not mean that a government or state is going to merely hold and never spend Bitcoin. No, a strategic reserve has a few, let's say, what's the correct word here? A few disadvantages, I'm going to say. Quite a few subtleties to it, which might not make a Bitcoin strategic reserve as bullish as it should be, or as hyped as it should be. Yeah. Okay, I'm still going strong there. Sorry. My apologies also if you see me blacking out or manipulating the screen a little bit. Most has to do that I'm a one-man studio at this point, so I'm using two computers, one streaming on Twitter and the other here to StreamYard on YouTube. Sorry for the inconvenience and sometimes if I'm doing weird stuff. In any case, let's continue. Now, to delve deeper into the subject, I'm going to ask you guys, I'm not going to ask it, I'm going to explain to you what a strategic reserve actually entails. And for that, I'm going to go straight towards the Wikipedia article. I know it's Wikipedia, etc., but it gives a nice little definition on what to expect. Now, what does it read? A strategic reserve is the reserve of a commodity or items that is held back from normal use by governments, organizations, or businesses in pursuance of a particular strategy or to cope with unexpected events. Now, in this first sentence of the definition, I'm going to highlight one thing, and that has to do with to cope with unexpected events. So it's highlighted. Let's delve deeper. A document issued by the US Department of Defense in 2005 defines a strategic reserve as follows: an external reinforcing force which is not committed in advance to a specific major subordinate command, but which can be deployed to any region for a mission decided at the time by the major NATO commander. There are several national and international projects aiming to preserve the existing natural wealth and diversity in case of mass extinction or global catastrophe. It has the coping with unexpected events. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault Facility, which is an example, opened in 2008, which focuses on collecting duplicate samples of plant seeds from all around the world and currently contains close to 1 million different agricultural seed samples. Final storage capacity is said to be 4.5 million seed samples. Another institution, Frozen Ark, concentrates on DNA preservation of endangered animals or generations. So here we learn that, the biggest giveaway is what I highlighted, and it has to do with to cope with unexpected events. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault and the Frozen Ark all deal with apocalyptic events, or well, unexpected events. Let's delve further into a few types of strategic reserves. This will allow us to get a deeper understanding what a strategic reserve actually entails. I'm going to highlight it a little bit and start focusing on strategic points, on certain wordings, what implies strategic reserve, before I am going to link it back towards Bitcoin and what that might entail short-term, long-term, mid-term, or in a global context towards the cryptocurrency market. So, types of strategic reserve can be financial in nature, such as ring-fenced funding or capital reserves of a large corporation. For Bitcoin, naturally, it's going to be capital reserves. A commodity, such as intervention stocks of food or petrol, see security of supply, and strategic petroleum reserves. This last one has to do, well, I'm going to refer towards the 1970s oil crisis, whereby the United States of America implemented fossil fuel-based strategic petroleum reserve, all having to do with having a reserve and making sure that their own economy, that their own nation would never run out of, well, fossil fuels, I'm going to say, as well as to make sure that their economy and nation can keep on marching, while at the same time there is the unexpected event of the Arab nations back in the day doing an economic boycott by saying no longer are we going to distribute petroleum towards the United States of America. Perhaps not 100% entirely right what I'm saying here, but you catch the concept, you catch the drift here. It is the implementation of a reserve in times of unexpected events. Keep that in mind. Others, such as specific machinery, such as railroad cars or steam locomotives to be used in an emergency situation, is also a type of strategic reserve. Examples of commodity reserves: global strategic petroleum reserves, Northeast home heating oil reserve, it's a sub-example. Strategic uranium reserves has to do with the production of electricity, well, the source to produce electricity in, what's the word again? National helium reserve, helium being frequently used in the petrochemical industry. Strategic grain reserve, it's a good one. Gold reserve, international strategic reserve of the Federation of Quebec maple syrup producers. This hints actually at Canada owning a strategic reserve of maple syrup. Strategic national stockpile, medical supplies in the US. In other countries, strategic national stockpile was implemented during the COVID period with the face masks and vaccines which were produced, etc. I'm not going to delve deeper into COVID. People who know me and follow me know exact my opinion about it. Now, what do we learn here of types of strategic reserves? Well, we learn that there's more to it than meets the eye. We have financial, commodities, or machinery. Very, very, very briefly said. Now, this also implies legislation is going to be a tad different depending on its nature. Now, where will Bitcoin fall? That's one of the very first questions which should be asked when there was the announcement of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Is it financial in nature? I was perhaps a bit too quick to say, yes, it is financial in nature. Why? Well, as a Bitcoin maximalist, I am used to seeing Bitcoin as a currency, meaning that it's financial in nature. Other people who are not like myself will see it as some kind of investment stock, which I'm not in agreement with, but it is still financial in nature. It is a capital reserve. However, in the last few years, under the Biden regime, the SEC actually labeled Bitcoin as a commodity. Now, there's a specification going on here whereby Wikipedia says, look, such as intervention stocks, which reads the definition to held by National Intervention Agency in the European Union as a result of intervention buying of commodities subject to market price support. Intervention stocks may be released into international market, onto internal markets, etc., etc. So Bitcoin back in the day was also seen by the SEC as a commodity for public use. Now, it lacks the physical aspect because it is an entirely, purely digital thing that is going on. It's programming, it's math. However, due to it being labeled as a commodity, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve falls a little bit in the middle here. It is financial in nature, but it can also be considered as a commodity. Making legislation and putting it into law, the justifications, etc., already a tad more difficult. There is no real clearly outlined type wherein it will fall, because naturally with each type come a certain amount of premises. Commodities, generally it is where is it going to be stocked? Who will be the custodian? Same can be said by financial. However, with financial, it generally is going to be referred towards private companies whereby the government has a certain amount of ownership or being held by the government itself. So there we already have a gray zone, and one of the reasons why it can't really be implemented willy-nilly on the get-go. There is a lot of specification already in what kind of type of strategic reserve we are talking about. Once we can deduce it, well, we can start going deeper. Yeah, sorry about that. Give me 2 seconds. Yeah, my apologies. You can see I'm doing this as a hobby and not really as a professional streamer here. So where were we? Like I said, already we will need to start specifying if it's financial or commodity in nature. Now we do know it's not specific machinery. Why? It's digital, but in the past has been labeled already as a commodity, and its financial nature is quite obvious. It's a no-brainer, it's no-go. But we have to make sure which one of the two it will be, or if it's going to be a combination of both. So legislation-wise, that's already a talking point, a point of discussion. Myself, I see it as financial in nature, and the most probable outcome will be that I will start seeing it as financial in nature. Now, with it being financial in nature, that means that, well, there will be a need for use of a custodian. And that's the next step you need to start asking yourself. Is it going to be a custodian which is government owned? Or is it going to be private company owned, but with influence or with a direct relation towards government? And that's one of the reasons I'm opening this up, little article by Reuters. How would a US Bitcoin strategic reserve work? And that's exactly where I want to delve deeper into it. Now, as you guys can see, scroll a little bit. The article starts as well with a little indication. What is strategic reserve? Strategic reserve, stock of critical resources which can be released at times of a crisis or supply disruptions, already highlighting the importance of unexpected events. Now, in this article here from Reuters, I'm going to say they are slightly more negative in its connotation, but directly highlighting one of the important points. Released at times of crisis or supply disruptions. You need to question yourself, when will law or when will a government say time of crisis? Now, I do not need to tell all of you guys where it concerns cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and finance that, well, inflation has been high, that there has been a tremendous loss of purchasing power. Even so, to the extent that governments worldwide are aware of the situation we're in, the dire situation we are in. Because here in Europe and both in the US, well, the different political parties which have won had, all of them, one theme in common, and it has to do with the economic state of affairs. We are in a certain time of crisis, as admitted by all politicians and political parties worldwide. Question is, when will they consider it a time of crisis? Now, here's the thing, the Bitcoin strategic reserve still needs to be implemented. We are still in talks. As of today, Donald Trump still isn't President of the United States yet. He will be inaugurated later this month. However, at this point, it's all theory, it's all talk. Like I said, lots of talk will need to pause before the BSR or Bitcoin Strategic Reserve will be implemented. As I highlighted in the definitions from Wikipedia, well, you guys know it's going to be difficult already in saying what type of strategic reserve it will be. Will it be a commodity or financial instrument? I merely highlighted my opinion. It's probably going to be a financial instrument, though rest assured, plenty of discussion will still come to see in which category it needs to be placed. And then we need the next step in regards to ownership. So who's going to hold it, or it's going to be implemented? How is it going? Well, how is the Bitcoin going to be accumulated? Is it from the already existing pile in government hands through seized means? So with that, I mean from criminal organizations from which they managed to seize the Bitcoin, etc., etc. So that already invites plenty of discussion and to see how it will be funded. I'm going to say, and something as we might assume, that all seized Bitcoin will probably be used in said Bitcoin strategic reserve. However, that's one of the next problematic points with a Bitcoin strategic reserve before it's going to be implemented. Said seized Bitcoin, can it be immediately transferred into the Bitcoin strategic reserve? Or, and that's a lot of legislation which needs to be passed on and looked deeper into, or is it not going to make part, with the exception that said reserve will only be, no, I'm going to reiterate it here. So we have the seized Bitcoin. You cannot willy-nilly say, okay, it now makes part of the reserve. No, because there's criminal activity, there's victims, etc., 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 and the Bitcoin seized through criminal means that the government now has in hands, well, is still tied to a variety of activities with victims which need to be paid out. Said seized Bitcoin make part of seized assets, which can be used to compensate the victims through sell-off or through one-on-one transactioning it towards the victims. So it means already there's a point of discussion. You cannot really nilly-willy go one-on-one. There's already a border there. Naturally, what is mostly assumed is people will say, okay, but that means that the government will simply buy Bitcoin from exchanges. True. Um, or, and that's a more likely point of view, that they will use certain exchanges, and in all probability, that's going to be Coinbase. That Coinbase will become their custodian, together perhaps with a few other exchanges which are US based, in order to make sure that the entire strategic reserve of Bitcoin remains in the US. But that also means that there is legislation in regards to holdings. Proof of reserves will be needed. Why am I going to highlight it? Well, everyone who was around previous bull cycles, so from 2020, 2021, knows about the FTX crash. And naturally, CZ from Binance started urging for more transparency in the crypto market and started urging towards proof of reserves, that more and more exchanges become more transparent with their actual holdings. Now, that discussion has slowed down pretty much now during the bull run, but it highlighted a few key points. And to reiterate, one of the key points was that plenty of exchanges have loaned crypto or loaned Bitcoin. That is to say, for example, I have an account on Kraken, Bitvavo, from where I can buy my Bitcoin. However, one of the important aspects is those two exchanges do not hold all Bitcoin within their own reserves. Part of it, and that was one of the problems during the FTX crash, was the lack of liquidity, meaning that, well, FTX could be considered an exchange, but it didn't have all the Bitcoin it claimed to have. By reason, it had distributed holdings. Some of the Bitcoin was held in a specially reserved account on Binance. Some Bitcoin was present in another company, and they themselves held some Bitcoin, but not as much as they claimed to be. There was less Bitcoin in self-custody than they had in total. And that's one of the problems which arose with FTX, was that they started speculating with more Bitcoin than they actually had. They made use of the promised reserves from the other exchanges, and even more, which led to their collapse as soon as the bear market started. And that already is going to be one of the problems with the Bitcoin strategic reserve: transparency and proof of reserves. Reserve that needs to be seen on chain, dedicated to the addresses of government directly related towards the Bitcoin strategic reserve. So there's going to be a force towards transparency, because, and let us be fair here, governments themselves will make use of custodians. By reason, in government, as governments change, especially in the US, every 4 years, there isn't really one central institute with one central set of people and employees who can keep track of it. They want it automated. They want it to have a trusted custodian doing it for them. You see, there's going to be a use of a third-party service provider. But that third-party service provider will need to ensure total transparency. So that already is a little highlight, a little important thing which needs to be implemented and which needs to be cleared. Rest of the article, we're going to read it through here for the people who aren't really watching. It is, how would a US strategic Bitcoin reserve work? Let's read it here. Analysts and legal experts are divided on whether Trump could use his executive powers to create a reserve or whether an act of Congress would be necessary. That already is a point of discussion. Some have argued Trump could create a reserve via an executive order directing the US Treasury Exchange Stabilization Fund, which can be used to purchase or sell foreign currencies and to also hold Bitcoin. Once again, highlighting the very disputable nature on how Bitcoin will be seen by the government. Will it be as a type of financial security strategy reserve, or will it be seen as a commodity? Let's continue. A reserve could include Bitcoin that the government has seized from criminal actors. Like I mentioned, that stands at around 200,000. It's not tokens, but coins worth about 21 billion at current prices. According to BitcoinTreasuries.net, Trump suggested in a July speech unveiling his Bitcoin reserve plan that this stockpile could be the starting point, although it remains unclear what the legal process would be for moving them out of the Justice Department. Like I highlighted, there are cases ongoing whereby the seized Bitcoins are considered as an asset in order to pay back victims of criminal activity, which are related to that. So that already needs plenty of legislation. So borders need to be made, as explained earlier. Trump has not said if the government would add to that stockpile by buying more Bitcoin in the open. Where am I? Back up. In the open market. To do that, the government may have to issue debt, although some proponents of a Bitcoin reserve say the United States could sell some of its gold reserves and use the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So I'm going to highlight this paragraph as mentioned, well, not as mentioned here before, but it hasn't been mentioned yet by me, but this is indeed another hectic point of discussion. They can buy Bitcoin and implement a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Fine. But it is the go about which is going to be important. Like mentioned in this whole highlighted paragraph, they say could stockpile buying more Bitcoin in the open market through issuing debt, which means printing more money, inflating the already overinflated supply of US dollars, which means, well, even more heightened inflation in order to buy a Bitcoin reserve. And when said option has been chosen, it's going to be positive for Bitcoin, but for the strategic reserve, it's going to be on the short term non-movement. By reason, well, the money you will be buying the Bitcoins with will be more worthless. And naturally, we could say, yeah, but on long term, Bitcoin appreciates over time, etc., etc. But it will become a net negative to the nation and only a positive for Bitcoin. For government, which wants to hold both in hand, it's going to be net zero. Perhaps, made even worse, it's going to be a net negative. Why? We shouldn't forget we are still living in a TradFi world. In a TradFi world whereby there's programmed inflation off, and that's worldwide, both here in Europe as in the US, where they want to maintain an inflation rate on a yearly basis of 2%, meaning that if they start issuing debt or printing more money, that would result in heightened inflation, so more than 2% inflation on a yearly basis. And that isn't a real positive, because on long term, it means you're making your money more worthless while enriching the custodian of the Bitcoin held, while enriching the custodian of the Bitcoin who holds it for you for the strategic reserve. Now, you might say, yes, but on long term, it will still be a net positive for governments. Not necessarily, because heightened inflation means as well we are delving deeper in said unexpected event. And what I previously highlighted here, where is it? Somewhere in the beginning, yeah. What? Sorry, going to. Can be released at times of crisis or supply. Yeah, I let it slightly better here. So meaning they are delving deeper, they are worsening the crisis in order to create the strategic reserve, up to the point that depending on how many millions or billions deeper they go into debt, the worse the crisis gets, but at the same time shortens the time period whereby the newly bought Bitcoin will need to be sold off. So this is going to be a very important balancing act. Now, another precaution, another thing I want to highlight here is that Bitcoin has a few fundamental technicalities to it. It works in 4-year-long cycles, and approximately that 4-year cycle can be divided in a 2-year bullish cycle and a 2-year bear cycle. The bullish cycle, which we currently are at date, there's plenty of appreciation for Bitcoin going on due to the halving, whereby the mining reward is slashed in half, which means a liquidity crisis going on, which means that less Bitcoin is newly mined fresh Bitcoin is hitting the markets in reduced number. But after a certain amount of time, that stabilizes, and that generally introduces the bear market. However, and it's a very important point I'm going to point you guys at, all will depend on the amount of Bitcoin and at what price it has been bought. This Bitcoin, no problem at all. There's probably appreciation going on, etc. But should the US government decide to stack Bitcoin during a bull market, you can rest assured that the value of the entire strategic reserve will take a tremendous hit once the bear cycle commences. Add to that if they printed the necessary amount of money in order to buy Bitcoin, well, not only will they have to deal with a high number of inflation going on, a high loss of value of the US dollar, but they will also see that their Bitcoin strategic reserve will lose in value. So it's going to be a tremendous net negative being programmed in if they didn't time the implementation of the reserve correctly, nor the buying time, which is, by the way, one of the reasons I'm highly critical when it concerns MicroStrategy. For you guys who do not know, MicroStrategy is a company owned by Michael Saylor, which has been buying during this bull run billions worth of Bitcoin. However, people are bullish about it. Myself, I'm more skeptical, slightly more bearish, because I am aware of the Bitcoin fundamentals and its cycles in regards to liquidity. So yeah, you may expect by 2026 that the bear market will commence and that we will be seeing corrections, which means if by then a Bitcoin strategic reserve has been implemented and Bitcoin bought by the government by issuing debt, that they might see very low returns. Surely we can say, okay, they own the Bitcoin, it's not going to move for a certain amount of time. For that, I'm going to refer back towards the wiki definition, as well as what I highlighted here. During unexpected events or times of crisis or trying times, such reserves can be sold. As the US dollar is the main currency of the United States, will that Bitcoin strategic reserve be sold in order to prevent a crisis with the US dollar? So you see where I'm going at? It's a very precarious situation you're going in, and one of the reasons why you shouldn't be as bullish, because technical wise and fundamentally wise, there is plenty to go on about, and it can create a death spiral, especially as governments themselves decide what a crisis situation is going to be. However, another additional part is that elections occur in the United States every 4 years. So if Trump manages to implement the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, you might assure yourself that the next president, if it isn't him once again, but another one, Democratic or Republic, doesn't matter, and who wasn't in agreement with setting up the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, that an immediate sell-off might occur. Market manipulation in a certain sense, or Bitcoin taking a tremendous hit. That's a long-term prediction, not even a prediction, situation which can occur. So that already underlines why a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve mustn't be handled with such hype and bullishness. There are mechanisms intertwined which might not be as positive as people think. So let's continue here. Where was it? Moving the amount of just at stockpile. Have to issue debt. Okay. Currently, the most concrete Bitcoin reserve proposal circulating in Washington comes from pro-crypto Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis, who personally holds 5 Bitcoins. She told CNBC last month. In July, she introduced a bill yet to gain traction that would create a reserve operated by the Treasury. So discussions and the very first things have been opened up. However, nothing to date yet has been accepted or implemented. Law and legislation is still ongoing. And from the last half hour, for the people who are watching here, there are plenty of things which need to be covered. Continue. The bill envisages that the Treasury would create a program to buy 200,000 Bitcoins annually for 5 years until the stockpile hit 1 million tokens. So they want to own 1/21th of the entire Bitcoin reserve. Is it possible? In theory, it's possible. However, plenty of Bitcoin is locked up in retail. Even Master, who is the single biggest whale in Bitcoin ownership, has less Bitcoin than that. What they're aiming at here is to own 1 million Bitcoin, whereas MicroStrategy barely reaches 200,000 with great effort and billions invested. So for utter scale here, you need to understand that what is put forth is simply insane. The debt issued in order to do so will be tremendous, that it would crash the US dollar beyond redemption. So it needs to be revised. It's problematic here. Positive note here is that they say, look, Bitcoin reserve would subsequently be maintained for a minimum of 20 years. That isn't written in stone. Once again, I'm going to highlight what the definition said of a strategic reserve: will be released during unexpected events, moments of crisis, or when needed. So minimum 20 years would be great if they manage to maintain it for 20 years. However, I do not see it as something very likely. Banking crisis, etc., has occurred every so many years, almost every 20 years approximately. And we are once again on the verge of one. Last one dating from 2008 under President Obama. Now let's continue, because I'm being slightly negative here for the most part of the stream. Now, what are the benefits of a Bitcoin reserve? In July speech, Trump's usage of the Bitcoin reserve would help the US dominate the global Bitcoin market in the face of growing competition from China. There is competition, without doubt. However, that isn't it. Other proponents argue that by holding a stockpile of Bitcoin, which they say is likely to continue appreciating over the long term, the US could reduce its deficit without raising taxes, strengthening the US dollar. That benefit is between brackets. It is not a 100% certainty. Everything will depend on how the Bitcoin for the strategic reserve has been acquired. And I'm going to refer back towards that issuing of debt, which means printing even more money. I mean, it would help strengthen the amount of Bitcoin in the reserve, but it would weaken the US dollar itself tremendously, meaning that this here is a void argument. If the buying isn't really well timed, will be void. Well, for other reasons I can't come up with for certain reason. I'm having a little blackout here, but most important part here to remember is all will depend on how the Bitcoin has been acquired. If it's going to be through debt, through issuing debt, or through printing more money, rest assured this benefit will become void, and the Bitcoin will be needed to be sold, because the inflation on the US dollar itself will be of such height that it can be considered an economic or even financial crisis. Continue. In November, Loomis told Fox Business that the plan would allow the United States to cut its debt in half in 20 years. What that does is help us protect ourselves against inflation, protect the US dollar on the world stage, she said. Once again, going to highlight it again, all depends on how they acquire the Bitcoin, period. It would stand to reason that the Bitcoin strategic reserve will grow over time, which means on a regular basis will new Bitcoin be bought, and probably with the already sized Bitcoin in the Justice Department will slowly and gradually be certain amounts be added towards the strategic reserve, because just as I said earlier, all will depend on how the cases in the Justice Department are going, and if said Bitcoin will remain sized or will be used and cashed out in order to compensate victims. So you mustn't immediately assume that current 200,000 Bitcoin within the Justice Department can be transferred one-on-one on the strategic reserve. There's multiple cases going on, multiple victims which still need to be paid out or need monetary compensation, etc. So that's one important point. Strong dollar would in turn give the United States more leverage over foreign adversaries like China and Russia, proponents say. So the main benefit here relies on plenty of aspects where I'm warning you guys about, and which entail how that Bitcoin is acquired over time, what steps government has taken in order to supplement its strategic reserves. If it is being done by issuing debt, rest assured it's going to be a net negative. If it's going to be through the Justice Department, the stockpile will grow, but gradually, depending on each case and the amount of Bitcoin they sized per case. See where I'm going at? So it isn't really an immediate solution. It is something which will come over time. Add to that there's the additional risk of when a financial crisis occurs, but you can rest assured that the said Bitcoin reserve will be sold off immediately in order to stabilize and ensure economic integrity and financial stability. What are the risks? Well, crypto skeptics say that unlike most other commodities, Bitcoin has no intrinsic use and is not crucial to the functioning of the US economy. Indeed, because the Bitcoin strategic reserve doesn't exist yet, isn't it crucial to the functioning of the US economy? However, once implemented, and debt has been issued, it will be so. So it is a very important thing to remember. Created in 2008, Bitcoin remains too young and volatile to presume its value will continue to rise in the long term. Crypto wallets remain notoriously vulnerable to cyber attacks, they also argue, and given its volatility, any government purchases or sales could have an outsized impact on Bitcoin's price. That last part is entirely true. However, when it concerns volatility, everything also depends on the value of the currency with which you buy Bitcoin. The US dollar isn't stable in value, it fluctuates over time. We know this because of inflation, of CPI scores or consumer price index scores, and we saw this also well with COVID, whereby everything became more expensive. That's a traditional view. In reality, prices remain the same, but the currency with which you buy has lost purchasing power. And that's one of the things, that's the volatility of the US dollar or even the euro that we're seeing here. So the risks are tremendous, and there is no stable thing when it concerns value. So in short, I'm going to close the screens here. 1 second, remove, and yeah, I'm going to keep it up here. Sorry, guys. I'm going to put it on big screen so you guys can see my face. So, like I said, when it concerns the Bitcoin strategic reserve, there are plenty of factors which need to be taken into account. The implementation of Bitcoin strategic reserve isn't as straightforward as people think it is. There's plenty of legislation and law which needs to be implemented. Plenty of structures which need to be re-verified as well, and that's one of the most important parts. It has to do with which has to do with the acquiring of the Bitcoin itself, how it is being done. And with that, I'm going to stop this stream. I hope you guys found it educational and interesting. Should you guys have any remaining questions, please answer in the tweets below, that from the Twitter live stream, or on YouTube, or reach out to me on my socials. And with that, I'm going to say thank you guys for watching, and up until next time. Bye.